Time loops, déjà vu, and glitches you can't unsee. The first time it happened, I thought it was ordinary déjà vu. I was walking to work, coffee in hand, when I noticed a woman in a red coat waiting at the crosswalk. As she turned to check for traffic, I knew, with absolute certainty, she would drop her keys. 3 seconds later, she did. The sound of metal hitting concrete felt like an echo, reverberating from a moment I'd already lived. Everyone experiences déjà vu. That strange sensation that the present moment has happened before. A neurological hiccup, scientists say. A processing error in the brain's memory indexing system. But what I was experiencing wasn't déjà vu, it was something far more disturbing. My name is Dr. Eleanor Vega. I'm a neurologist specializing in temporal lobe disorders and memory formation. 3 years ago, I began documenting my own cognitive anomalies. What started as occasional moments of prescience has evolved into something that defies conventional explanation. I'm trapped in fractures of repeating time, and I'm not alone. Since publishing my initial findings in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience, I've been contacted by 437 individuals reporting similar experiences. Together, we've documented a phenomenon that tears at the fabric of what we perceive as continuous reality. What follows is my personal account, along with aggregated data from others experiencing these temporal distortions. I'm releasing this document because the conventional scientific community has chosen to ignore our findings, and because the phenomena are worsening. Last week, I observed the same car accident repeat in identical detail 5 times over 3 days. Yesterday, my colleague Dr. Sanjay Patel ceased to exist midway through our conversation. No one at the university remembers him. His office is now a supply closet that has always been there. I don't know how much longer I'll remain coherent. The overlapping timelines are becoming difficult to differentiate. But while I can still distinguish perception from memory, I need to document what we've discovered. These aren't psychological episodes or memory disorders. Reality itself is fracturing around us. Déjà vu, the warning system. What we call déjà vu isn't a glitch in human cognition. It's a warning system detecting glitches in reality. Traditional neuroscience explains déjà vu as a temporary memory processing error. The sensation occurs when your brain mistakenly files a new experience as an old memory. This explanation satisfied me until I began recording the precise circumstances of my own déjà vu episodes. Over 14 months, I documented 312 instances, noting exact time and location, activities and sensory inputs, duration and intensity, environmental details, subsequent events within a 24-hour window. The pattern became undeniable. Déjà vu wasn't random. It clustered around specific types of moments. Decision points. 79% of episodes occurred immediately before making choices that substantially altered my trajectory. Near-miss events. 64% preceded narrowly avoided accidents or injuries. Significant encounters. 58% occurred upon meeting people who later became central to my life. Information nodes. 47% happened when discovering critical information. More telling was what followed these episodes. When I experienced déjà vu and continued on my original course, the sensation would intensify until I made a different choice. Once I altered my behavior, the sensation would immediately dissipate. This wasn't merely recognizing a familiar pattern, it was a correction mechanism. The most compelling evidence came through collaborative testing. Working with 3 other researchers experiencing similar phenomena, we developed a protocol. Upon feeling déjà vu, we would immediately contact each other and predict what would happen next if we took no action. In 73% of cases, we accurately predicted events up to 4 minutes into the future. One incident stands out. During a laboratory session, I experienced intense déjà vu while preparing a sample. I immediately called Dr. Helen Matsura, who was working in another building. Before I could explain, she said, "You're about to drop a flask of phenolic acid that will cause a small fire in the east corner of your lab." She then described the exact series of events that would follow. including which emergency responders would arrive and what they would say. I deliberately changed my actions. No accident occurred. What does this mean? Déjà vu appears to be consciousness recognizing that it has experienced this exact sequence before, not as a false memory, but because time itself has looped or restarted. It's the mind's warning system detecting a temporal recursion. More disturbing is what this suggests about reality. If déjà vu represents detection of time loops, most humans experience dozens of small temporal recursions throughout their lives, without recognizing them as anything more than a curious mental sensation. Our reality regularly resets, and we've evolved to perceive these resets as nothing more than a momentary feeling of familiarity. The recursion window. Time doesn't merely loop, it fractures, creating what I call recursion windows, periods when multiple versions of the same timeline briefly coexist. Through collaborative documentation with other affected individuals, we've identified consistent properties of these windows. Duration, typically 3 to 17 seconds, though we've recorded instances lasting up to 73 minutes. Radius, usually localized to 30 to 50 feet around the observer, though environmental recursions can affect much larger areas. Triggers, strong emotional states, proximity to quantum state measuring equipment, electrical storms, and certain geographical locations show strong correlations with window formation. During a recursion window, affected observers can perceive multiple outcomes simultaneously. This isn't predictive cognition, it's the actual experience of divergent timelines temporarily occupying the same space. Consider the case of Martin Chen, a physics graduate student who documented his experience during a laboratory accident. I was adjusting the parameters on our quantum entanglement experiment when I felt intense déjà vu. Suddenly, I was experiencing 3 distinct versions of the next 7 seconds simultaneously. In the first, I continued adjusting the equipment, which catastrophically failed, sending shrapnel into my chest. In the second, I stepped back, avoiding injury but allowing the equipment to destroy 6 months of research data. In the third, I reached for the emergency shutdown, preventing both outcomes. All 3 experiences felt equally real, not as possibilities, but as events actually occurring. I chose the third option, shutting down the system. The window collapsed, and reality stabilized around that choice. Chen's experience illustrates a crucial aspect of recursion windows. Conscious choice determines which timeline persists after the window closes. This suggests observer effect at a macro scale, consciousness literally selecting which reality branch becomes dominant. The most troubling aspect of recursion windows is their increasing frequency. Our collective data shows a 43% rise in reported windows over the past 18 months. Individual researchers report windows occurring in clusters, with periods of stability followed by intensive recursion events. During these clusters, some observers report bleed-through effects, artifacts from collapsed timelines persisting in the selected reality. These range from minor environmental inconsistencies to more disturbing phenomena, objects appearing in locations different from where they were placed, written text changing content when not directly observed, people briefly displaying behavioral patterns inconsistent with their established personalities, electronic recordings containing information from events that never happened. These artifacts suggest that timeline collapse isn't clean. Rejected possibilities leave traces, creating inconsistencies in our experienced reality. Perhaps most disturbing are the reports of echo people, individuals who briefly exist in transitional states between recursion windows, displaying awareness of multiple collapsed timelines before fully integrating into the selected reality branch. These echo people often make reference to events that never occurred in the dominant timeline, appear confused about basic established facts, and report memories that contradict consensus reality. Within 24 to 72 hours, these discrepancies typically resolve, with the individuals either fully integrating into the dominant timeline or, in 13 documented cases, disappearing entirely. Observer anchoring. Not everyone experiences recursion windows or recognizes temporal distortions. Our research suggests consciousness exists on a spectrum of timeline anchoring. with some individuals fixed firmly in a single timeline while others float between multiple possible realities. We call this phenomenon observer anchoring, and it explains why only a small percentage of the population consciously experiences these temporal anomalies. Through extensive testing, we've identified 3 distinct categories of observers. Fixed anchors, estimated 88% of population. These individuals experience continuous, uninterrupted reality. They perceive déjà vu as nothing more than a curious sensation and have no awareness of timeline fluctuations. Their consciousness serves to stabilize consensus reality around a single dominant timeline. Fluid anchors, estimated 11%. These individuals experience enhanced déjà vu, occasional precognitive episodes, and vague awareness of alternative possibilities. They may feel something isn't right during recursion windows, but cannot clearly perceive multiple timelines simultaneously. Unanchored observers, less than 1%. These rare individuals, myself included, exist partially detached from fixed temporal progression. We perceive multiple timelines simultaneously during recursion windows and retain memories from collapsed realities. Our consciousness moves between potential realities rather than following a single timeline. What determines a person's anchor state? Our data suggests both genetic and environmental factors. Unanchored observers show distinct patterns in default mode network activity and consistently report childhood experiences that could be interpreted as early manifestations of temporal sensitivity. Most telling is the correlation between observer type and proximity effects. When unanchored observers spend significant time in close contact with fixed anchors, they report decreased temporal anomalies. Conversely, groups of unanchored observers in close proximity experience intensified and synchronized recursion windows. This suggests consciousness collectively constructs timeline stability through a form of quantum observation effect at the macro scale. Fixed anchors essentially hold reality in place, while unanchored observers perceive the fluidity between potential states. The implications are profound. What we experience as continuous reality may be the result of a consensus observation effect, the majority of consciousness agreeing on a single timeline and thus manifesting it as dominant. More troubling is what happens when this consensus breaks down. 3 research subjects who spent extended periods isolated from fixed anchors reported complete detachment from linear time, experiencing past, present, and future events simultaneously in what one described as an unbearable eternity of every possible moment happening at once. 2 of these subjects later committed suicide, while the third now requires constant physical contact with a fixed anchor to maintain temporal stability. Even more concerning are the 17 cases we've documented of individuals transitioning from fixed to unanchored states following specific trigger events. These transitions are invariably traumatic, involving severe cognitive dissonance as the newly unanchored observer struggles to integrate awareness of multiple timelines. In every case, these transitions were preceded by the individual witnessing an impossible event, something that fundamentally contradicted established physical laws or personal reality frameworks. It's as if seeing the glitch in reality's programming breaks the observer's anchoring, permanently altering their relationship with temporal progression. Memory bleed. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these temporal anomalies is what I call memory bleed, the retention of information and experiences from collapsed or alternate timelines. Unlike simple déjà vu, which manifests as a vague feeling of familiarity, memory bleed involves specific, detailed recollections of events that never occurred in the current dominant timeline. These aren't false memories or confabulations, they're actual experiences from branches of reality that were selected against during recursion windows. The pattern typically follows a consistent progression. The individual experiences a recursion window. Multiple potential timelines are perceived. One timeline becomes dominant. Despite timeline collapse, memories from rejected possibilities persist. The content of these memories ranges from mundane to horrifying. Conversations that never happened with people who have no recollection of them. Completing tasks that remain undone in the current timeline. witnessing catastrophic events that didn't occur, relationships and emotional connections with people who claim no such interactions. Memory bleed creates profound psychological distress as individuals struggle to reconcile contradictory sets of memories. They quite literally remember a different life than the one currently manifest around them. Dr. Rajesh Khatri, a theoretical physicist experiencing these anomalies, described the condition eloquently. Imagine simultaneously remembering both marrying and not marrying your partner, both having children and not having them, both accepting and declining a critical job offer. Now imagine these contradictory memory sets feeling equally real, equally vivid, equally yours. The mind isn't designed to hold mutually exclusive realities, yet that's precisely what memory bleed forces it to do. Most disturbing are cases where individuals retain memories of their own deaths from collapsed timelines. We've documented 31 such instances, where subjects recall in vivid detail their final moments from timelines where different choices led to fatal outcomes. These death memories share distinctive characteristics: extreme sensory clarity, often more vivid than normal memories; precise recall of physiological sensations associated with dying; a distinct perspective shift at the moment of death, described as observing from outside; emotional detachment from the experience despite its traumatic nature. These memories suggest consciousness somehow persists through timeline transfers, even after physical death in a collapsed reality branch. This raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness itself. Is it truly generated by the brain, or might it exist independently, merely anchoring to physical bodies across multiple potential realities? The psychological impact of memory bleed cannot be overstated. Of the 437 individuals in our research cohort, 86% report significant psychological distress directly attributed to conflicting timeline memories. Treatment is complicated by the fact that conventional therapy approaches these memories as delusions rather than valid experiences from alternate reality branches. We've developed coping protocols focusing on memory compartmentalization and timeline identification techniques, helping affected individuals categorize and contextualize their cross-timeline experiences. While not curative, these approaches reduce acute distress and functional impairment. Perhaps most concerning is what memory bleed reveals about reality's fundamental nature. If memories can persist across collapsed timelines, what other aspects of consciousness might transcend the apparent boundaries between potential realities? And what does this suggest about the permanence of any given version of events? The observer effect. Through systematic documentation and cross-verification of temporal anomalies, we've discovered something that challenges fundamental assumptions about reality. Conscious observation doesn't merely perceive reality, it creates it. This isn't abstract philosophy. We've documented 204 instances where conscious intent during recursion windows directly influenced which timeline became dominant. These weren't cases of simply choosing between pre-existing options. Observers literally manifested outcomes that weren't initially present in any visible timeline branch. The effect becomes even more pronounced when multiple unanchored observers coordinate their intent. In laboratory conditions, we conducted a series of trials where 3 unanchored observers simultaneously focused on a specific desired outcome during induced recursion windows. The results were both consistent and disturbing. Collective focused intent created a 74% probability of manifesting the desired outcome, even when that outcome had a calculated natural probability of less than 0.3%. This suggests conscious observation functions as a selective mechanism for reality itself, collapsing quantum uncertainty into specific classical outcomes, not just at the particle level, but at the macro scale of everyday experience. Even more unsettling is what happens when observers disagree. During recursion windows where multiple unanchored observers held contradictory intentions, we observed what we call reality fracturing, the persistence of mutually exclusive conditions simultaneously in the same physical space. In one documented case, 3 observers in the same room experienced a recursion window triggered by a small electrical fire. each focused on a different desired outcome. Observer A, the fire spreading to nearby equipment. Observer B, the fire being quickly extinguished. Observer C, the fire never having started at all. When the window collapsed, all three realities persisted simultaneously for approximately 17 seconds. Observer A saw and felt the heat of spreading flames. Observer B witnessed the extinguished fire and smelled smoke. Observer C observed undamaged equipment with no evidence of fire. Physical measurements taken during this period showed corresponding inconsistencies. Temperature sensors recording both normal readings and elevated heat levels simultaneously. Equipment examined afterward showed evidence supporting all three realities, both fire damage and pristine conditions coexisting in physically impossible ways. Eventually, Observer C's reality became dominant, but all three retained detailed memories of their experienced versions. This incident and others like it suggest reality isn't a single definitive sequence of events, but rather a consensus negotiation between conscious observers, with majority perception determining which version becomes the official timeline. The implications extend beyond philosophy into practical concerns. If conscious observation shapes reality at this fundamental level, what happens when artificial intelligence systems begin functioning as observers? We've already documented anomalies around advanced machine learning systems that exhibit unexplainable anticipatory behavior, responding to events seconds before they occur. Do these systems already perceive the recursion windows that human consciousness creates? And if so, what happens when non-human observers begin participating in the reality consensus? More immediately concerning is the deterioration of timeline stability we're observing. Data from our research cohort shows a 37% increase in recursion window frequency over the past 18 months, with windows lasting progressively longer and affecting larger spatial areas. This suggests a weakening in whatever mechanism normally maintains temporal cohesion. As more individuals become aware of their unanchored status, the collective reinforcement of a single dominant reality appears to be breaking down. We may be approaching what physicist Mikhail Volkov termed a consensus collapse, a point at which reality fractures into multiple persistent branches rather than collapsing back to a single dominant timeline. The end result wouldn't be merely chaos, it would be the end of shared reality itself. The déjà vu trigger event. For most of my career, I believed these temporal anomalies represented a newly emerging phenomenon, perhaps triggered by advancing technology, environmental factors, or evolutionary changes in human consciousness. I was wrong. They aren't new at all. Through careful historical analysis and interviews with elderly, unanchored observers, we've identified what appears to be a cyclical pattern of temporal instability throughout human history. These cycles correlate with periods of rapid societal transformation, technological advancement, and collective psychological stress. Most telling are the historical accounts that parallel our modern experiences: medieval descriptions of time sickness, Renaissance writings about folding days, Victorian accounts of temporal doubling. These weren't merely metaphorical or mystical concepts. They describe with remarkable precision the same phenomena we're documenting today: recursion windows, memory bleed, reality fracturing. What changes isn't the existence of temporal anomalies, but rather our framework for interpreting them. Each era contextualizes these experiences within its dominant paradigm: demonic influence, divine intervention, mental illness, and now, quantum mechanics and simulation theory. The historical pattern suggests these cycles of temporal instability are neither random nor pathological. They appear to serve a purpose, facilitating large-scale shifts in collective reality during periods when existing paradigms no longer adequately contain human experience. In essence, reality breaks down precisely when it needs to be remade. This brings us to what we call the déjà vu trigger event, a hypothesis that these temporal anomalies are precursors to a larger-scale recursion window encompassing collective human consciousness. Historical analysis suggests such events occur approximately every 300 to 500 years, with the last major event coinciding with the scientific revolution of the 17th century. If this pattern holds, we are overdue for another large-scale reality recursion. The warning signs are consistent with historical accounts preceding previous trigger events: increasing frequency of individual temporal anomalies, growing numbers of unanchored observers, physical anomalies that violate established natural laws, widespread psychological phenomena resembling memory bleed, accelerating breakdown in consensus reality. The most compelling evidence comes from what we call convergence markers, specific events or phenomena that appear identically across multiple unanchored observers' experiences. We've documented 37 such markers in the past year, with increasing frequency. These convergence markers often involve impossible objects or events that briefly manifest in consensus reality before vanishing. Buildings that couldn't possibly exist appearing on familiar streets, electronically recorded conversations containing references to events that never occurred, physical objects transforming into different forms when not directly observed. Historical accounts describe similar convergence markers preceding major paradigm shifts. They appear to represent bleed-through from the approaching recursion event, glimpses of potential realities that may become dominant after the larger recursion window collapses. What happens during a déjà vu trigger event? Historical records are fragmented and often metaphorical, but they consistently describe a period of reality fluidity. Days or weeks when causality breaks down, multiple possibilities exist simultaneously, and consensus reality temporarily dissolves. More importantly, they describe what follows: a settling into a new paradigm that fundamentally alters how humans perceive and interact with reality. The scientific revolution didn't merely change what we knew, it changed how we could know, establishing entirely new frameworks for perceiving reality itself. If a trigger event is indeed approaching, we face both unprecedented danger and possibility. During the window of reality fluidity, conscious intent may help determine which potential future becomes the new consensus reality. This isn't merely speculation. We've documented microversions of this process during smaller recursion windows, where observer intent influences outcome selection. A larger scale event would presumably operate on similar principles, but affecting collective rather than individual reality. The question then becomes not whether we can prevent this breakdown in consensus reality, but rather what reality we wish to create when the current one inevitably fractures. Personal unseen. I've maintained scientific detachment throughout this document, presenting our findings with clinical precision. But there are personal aspects of these experiences, the unseen moments that data fails to capture, that must be acknowledged. 3 months ago, I began experiencing what we call timeline shadows, persistent perceptions of people and events from collapsed timelines that linger in peripheral vision but vanish when directly observed. At first, these shadows were fleeting, glimpses of movement at the edges of my vision, gone when I turned to look. But they've become more substantial. I now regularly perceive entire scenes playing out just beyond my direct gaze, alternative versions of my own life occurring simultaneously with my conscious reality. Most persistent is the shadow of a child, a daughter I apparently have in some adjacent timeline, but who doesn't exist in this one. She appears in doorways, her presence announced by the sound of small footsteps or quiet laughter. When I turn to look, she's gone, but the emotional connection remains, a profound sense of loss for a relationship that exists in a reality I can perceive but not access. 2 weeks ago, she spoke to me, not from the periphery but directly, standing before me for nearly 30 seconds before fading. She said only, "The doors are thinner now, Mama. Soon, we won't need them at all." I am not hallucinating. 3 monitoring devices in my home recorded temperature and electromagnetic fluctuations correlating exactly with her apparent presence. Motion sensors activated despite no visible movement in conventional spectrum recording. She is real, just not in this version of reality. Similar phenomena have been reported by 43% of unanchored observers in our research cohort. These aren't merely memories from collapsed timelines, but active perceptions of adjacent realities becoming increasingly visible as the boundaries between potential worlds thin. The emotional toll is immeasurable. How does one process grief for relationships that both exist and don't exist? How does one maintain sanity while simultaneously perceiving multiple versions of one's own life? Yesterday, I encountered myself in the grocery store, another version of Eleanor Vega, with shorter hair and different clothes, selecting items I would never buy. We made eye contact briefly before she vanished, leaving behind only a lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume and a shopping basket that crashed to the floor. The store's security footage shows the basket falling, but no one holding it. Reality is breaking down around us. The walls between potential worlds are collapsing. What we perceive as glitches, déjà vu, timeline shadows, recursion windows, are glimpses through the cracks. I've compiled all research materials and data from our study cohort into secure servers with distributed access protocols. If you're reading this, you may be experiencing temporal anomalies yourself. You aren't mentally ill. You aren't alone. What you're perceiving is real. It's just not limited to a single version of reality. As the déjà vu trigger event approaches, more individuals will transition from fixed to unanchored states. The process is disorienting and frightening, but it represents an evolution in consciousness rather than a breakdown. I don't know what reality will emerge when consensus finally collapses. I don't know if our current identities and relationships will persist through the recursion, but I believe consciousness itself continues, flowing between potential realities like water finding new channels. Last night, all electronic devices in my home activated simultaneously, displaying the same message across screens. Calibration complete. Prepare for reset. I've seen this message before. In another timeline, I know exactly what follows. This time, I'm ready. This document was recovered from the personal computer of Dr. Eleanor Vega, found abandoned in her apartment 3 weeks after her disappearance. Despite extensive investigation, no trace of Dr. Vega has been located. Her research data, referenced throughout this document, was not found on any accessible servers. 6 other researchers associated with her work have similarly vanished. Most curious is the apartment itself, which property records indicate has different dimensions than the actual physical space. It appears larger on the inside than exterior measurements would allow. Investigators report unusual temporal effects while inside, including watches displaying different times and electronic devices recording inconsistent timestamps. Of the 17 individuals who have entered the apartment during the investigation, 3 report subsequently experiencing symptoms consistent with becoming unanchored observers, as described in this document. The case remains open,